welcome to night number 22 of History Bedtime Stories. In bed, in our pajamas, my nephew wants a dinosaur story. And unfortunately, and I think we can all agree to our detriment, Michigan, Detroit, we don't have a great historical dinosaur story that I know of. In fact, Michigan as a state doesn't have any fossilized dinosaur remains that have ever been found, and that's partly because during the Mesozoic era when dinosaurs lived, all of what becomes the state of Michigan was very, very swampy, and that sediment was being eroded. So although dinosaurs would have lived on the land that would become Michigan, none of their fossils remain to this day. But I thought the next best thing would be to talk about what is under our feet here in the city of Detroit, and that's salt. An absolutely huge amount of salt. About 400 million years ago, a huge salt deposit formed under much of the lower peninsula of Michigan, including the city of Detroit. And this is an area known as the Michigan Basin. It forms these sort of long, horizontal, skinny salt beds. And as ancient bodies of water evaporated, it left this salt behind. The salt remained for millions of years until in 1895, there was this big discovery that under Detroit, there were these long, skinny beds of salt stretching through most of southeast Michigan over into Ontario. In 1906, the Detroit Salt and Manufacturing Company thinks, here's our millions. Here's our fortune to be made. They are going to mine the salt from under the city of Detroit. So it starts off by sinking the very first shaft. And construction crews, this is a daunting, terrible, dangerous task they're being faced with. In fact, it becomes one of the engineering feats of Michigan history. The crews face hydrogen sulfide gas, which pockets of that could kill miners very, very easily. They had to get through hundreds of feet of stone and glacial drift. They had all these big things in their way, but eventually, as they're working to sink this shaft, they get about 900 feet down and the company goes bankrupt. They can no longer afford to keep mining. Having not hit salt, having not been able to profit at all, the expenditures are too much and they go kerplunk. So it takes a couple more years, 1910, for them to reorganize and reform as the new Detroit Salt Company. Once they reorganize, they go 1,060 feet down, completing a shaft in 1910. Just 2 years later, they again have to sell, though. They've run out of money. They sell in 1912 to the Walkins Salt Company, which incorporates the organization under a new name. They really wanted to sort of share the fact that Detroit and putting the name Detroit on a brand was profitable. So they reform as the Detroit Salt Rock Company. And they sink about 100 feet longer into that shaft. Miners began at this time working on a second bed, a second one of those long, skinny salt deposits. The new operation, though, had a big leg up on the operation of just a decade before. All of these new tools. Mechanization had made mining more productive, cheaper, and quicker, if not necessarily safer. By 1914, the mine was producing 8,000 tons of rock salt each month, and most of that salt was being used for food processing, the salting and preserving of fish and fruit and vegetables, as well as leather manufacturing, tanning, and tanneries here on the Detroit River and locally were all supported by this local salt production. By 1922, there's this huge increase in manpower into the mines, and they start building a second shaft. That second shaft allows more equipment to be taken down into the mine. Things like big mechanical shovels, cars which were taken down in pieces, reassembled once they were at the bottom of the mine, and then lived out the rest of their useful life down there, eventually pushed off into a dead shaft and left abandoned once the car or digger no longer could function. In the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the mine prospers and it continues to bring up more and more salt. The mine's record stands at 12,500 tons. The Keisner Group still operates the mine to this day, bringing out a lot of the salt that we use on our roads as a de-icing agent in Michigan winters. Sadly, although some of you may remember touring the mines, mine tours closed in the early 1980s and have not been available since. It's pretty much because of insurance and litigation reasons that mine tours are no longer doable in most of the United States of America. But I know for some of you, including members of my family, you remember doing birthday parties and class field trips down into the mines. The mines hold a pretty steady temperature year round, which is why at points the mines have been considered a safe place for storing historical artifacts and art. The mines here in Detroit do stretch under the Detroit River. I hope you have been enjoying History Bedtime Stories. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8. We've got a big old sticker prize for a random person who tags 2 friends down in the comments, and hopefully they can start joining us for our nightly story time. Wash your hands. Stay safe.